So I recently bought all these dystopian literature books, and I don't know which one to pick though. How about this? Meeny, miny, the easiest one. Hello, my name is Bruce, and today I want to talk about Animal Farm. See, after reading The Great Gatsby, I bought a couple of books, dystopian novels, and I heard all great things about them. But I want to start with Animal Farm first. It's the easiest, most simple, and it will lead me greater to reading the other books and think more about it. Especially with two of the four books that I bought is from George Orwell. I won't talk a whole lot about his story this video until I read all of 1984, because then that way you guys can read, I mean not read, watch my next video, which will probably be 1984. But what you need to know about George Orwell for this book is that he was a socialist. He heavily disliked the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, who was the leader of the Soviet Union during World War II until he died in 1952 after a cerebral hemorrhage. Basically, his brain stopped working. And this book is all about the Russian Revolution and how it sounds amazing, sounds perfect. But then as it goes on further and further and further, you can see how all of it just doesn't, it ends horribly. Everybody's miserable, and this is not the nation that they wanted at the beginning of the book. So I'm just going to go through the chapters now. That was a quick synopsis of George Orwell and why he made the book. So in chapter 1, we have this old boar named Old Major. Now, in real life, Old Major represents Vladimir Lenin, who was the leader during the Russian Revolution, who overthrew the Tsar and the Republican governments of Russia at the time, and he created the Soviet Union, and a mixture of Karl Marx, who was the founder of communism. Okay, now Old Major is giving a speech to all the other animals on the farm, and he says, life can be better than this. We should have a revolution and overthrow the farmer who is exploiting us, and we should all have our own food. We should all be equal, essentially. And that humans are out against us. They are the only animal that only consumes but does not produce. Okay, that's the entirety synopsis of chapter 1. So in chapter 2, he dies. He was very old. And two figures stand out. Napoleon, who is meant to represent Joseph Stalin. And, as I said earlier, he is going to be the next leader of the Soviet Union, as it was called at the time. And Snowball, whose real name in real life is Trotsky. Trotsky was also a communist politician. He was a general in the Red Army, or the Soviet Union's army, and he was well liked up until his power struggle with Stalin, in which case Stalin won the power struggle, and he kicked out Trotsky. So both of these leaders, they decided to create the 7 Commandments, which is anything with 2 legs, aka humans, is bad. It's bad. You don't like humans. Anything with 4 legs or that has wings, those are good. Those are your friends. Okay, trust those animals. Okay, there's no killing of any other animal. All animals are equal. You can't sleep in human beds, and you can't drink alcohol. So basically, don't be humans. We're all equal, and animals are the best. It's simple as that, or it should be. So That's basically the entirety of chapter 2. In chapter 3, you see this is the beginning of the corruption. Okay, so the pigs in the story are the smartest animals, all right, which also kind of biologically made sense because they have a very similar uh, organ and brain tissues and systems that us humans do. So, you know, I don't know if Orwell meant for that to happen, but it's kind of cool and interesting. But yeah, so the pigs are the smartest, all right? And they are, despite everybody being equal, okay, everybody's gonna be equal, they do less work and they oversee everything, okay? So almost immediately, we're not even, like, it barely started, okay? They just did the revolution against Farmer Jones, who was meant to represent the rich people in the aristocracy and the Tsar, who was the emperor of Russia before the communists took over. But yeah, they kicked him out, and that was essentially what the Russian Revolution was. And now we're in chapter 3 already out of 10, so only 1/3 of the way booked, and we already see that not everything's equal already, okay? Because the pigs are at the top, all right? And the pigs, they argue over what they should do because they don't have a full plan yet. They had the step of overthrowing Farmer Jones because he's bad. What do you do after that? I mean, you go with 7 commandments, but I mean, you have to have a plan. So they do less work, but they decide that all the other animals, they need to work hard. Okay, they specifically need to work hard for everybody to have their own food. All right, so that everybody can live, and it's their own food. So the animals are all for it at this point. All right. So the pigs, with their first step, making the animals work hard. The first step is to try and educate them. Okay, if you educate people or animals to understand why the revolution is good, then they will be on your side almost forever. So they try to get the pigs try to get the animals learn how to read, because they put the 7 commandments on the side of a bar. All right, it's all up there. This was a failure, which in real life, they did this in real life. They tried to educate the serfs, which were the poor people that worked, didn't own anything at the time in Russia, and they tried to educate them. But since, most serfs are adults, it's really hard to teach an adult how to learn more skills. It's essentially, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's essentially what went on here. So they tried that and it failed, and they will keep on having plans, which in real life were called 4-year plans, which was to increase productivity in the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union was backwards compared to all the Western countries, to have more food, and to have a large military. Besides one of those 3, they all failed miserably. So that happens. And in chapter 4, the Battle of the Cowshed happens, which is what the Russian Civil War was. It's a complete allegory. So what happens is that Farmer Jones and a couple of humans try to take over the farm again. It fails because the animals drove them out, and was partly due because of Snowball's ability to lead and kick them all out. They did. And so now the farm is under complete control of the animals, and they will now decide to do their own actions again. So the animals, they win. They win the Civil War. But Boxer, who is a horse, very strong horse, who represents the epitome of the worker, the good, strong worker who helps everybody out, and everybody loves this guy. And I mean everybody. Everybody loves him. So he gets a little injured, but he's okay after a while. And that's the entirety of chapter 4. So in chapter 5, Napoleon and Snowball deciding their plans, they argue over a windmill. Snowball proposes that they should have a windmill, which would get them more food, more water, and more electricity so that they don't have to work as hard for that food and water. Now, Napoleon, for no reason, just decides to be against it. He's not a very clear speaker, which also aligns with real life because Joseph Stalin was not educated, and he robbed banks. Before he was in political positions of power, he robbed banks to give to the Communist Party in Russia, specifically to the Bolsheviks. And yeah, he was not very educated, which is in stark contrast to Snowball or Trotsky, who was college educated and was very close to Vladimir Lenin and knew military strategy and understood that there had to be some level of, I don't know what to call it, like there has to be steps in order to take for true equality to happen, essentially. They argue about that, and they also argue about how Snowball wants to give messenger pigeons and messages to other farms in the area so that they can rebel against the farmers over there. Napoleon is like, no, we need to worry about our own. We need to worry about our own animals, and we need to build up our stuff before we actually go over to other communities and farms, which aligns pretty well in real life. In real life, Snowball or Trotsky believed in the Second International beliefs, which was if you have communist revolutions everywhere, you don't need to worry about outside powers, and everybody will just get along. While Napoleon, or Stalin in this case, believed that you need to build up your industry a whole bunch and only stay communism within the Soviet Union because you need to have a strong base in your own home country before you can spread to other places. Of course, since Stalin won, we got the third International's ideas won over, and that's why, for most part, if he conquered a place, it would be a part of the Soviet Union and not be its own thing, except after World War II. So they argue a whole bunch, and Snowball looks like he's winning the argument because Snowball can speak. He can naturally speak well, unlike myself, obviously. He can speak well, and before this happened, Napoleon basically kidnapped a bunch of puppies, and he put them in where only he could see them. And he basically made them only loyal to himself. The puppies in this story represent the NKVD, which was the Russian secret police. You can think of them as the American equivalent of the CIA, where they would go into foreign countries or even into their own country and do experiments and hurt people, and if you were against the state in any way, they would kill you. So he releases the dogs, who are now not puppies anymore, and he and the puppies threaten basically everybody, and they chase out Snowball. So this is kind of what happens in real life, where the NTV, it wasn't specifically like that, but how Trotsky was forced to be in exile. He first went into exile in Turkey, which is south of Russia, but the Turkish didn't want him because Turkey at this point is a very right-leaning country, and so they kick him out. They want to kick him out as soon as possible, and France lets him back then. Lets Trotsky in, until they realized, oh, this is a very good speaker, and we have a very large communist political party that would want to overthrow our government. Let's not let him in. So they kick him out, and eventually the final country that allows him to stay at a certain place is Mexico, where he stays there until he dies, when Stalin orders his execution, and he pays a Mexican to kill him. And I mean, Trotsky knew what was going to happen. Like, there was no way he was going to survive that. But yeah, so you can already tell in history, throughout this book, that there's rampant corruption all the way up to 3. Okay, not everybody's equal. And up to 5, you see political assassinations, essentially. And that everybody just has to follow along. And you're going to see a theme through that where, one, everybody just goes along with the government, because the government's very trustworthy. Every government, very trustworthy, okay? You better not be against the government. Government good, government always good, all right? Yeah, you better. I see you. All right. But yeah, the animals think that if anything changes, that it was just due to faulty memory. So they're really either very naive or very stupid, except for one character, which I'll talk about later. And that any ideas that Napoleon gets is from other people, but he just passes it off as his own ideas. So that's the conclusion of chapter 5. So for chapter 6, the workload is horrendous. I mean, the workload is 60 hours a week. Now, they're working every day, all 7 days. But since most people work in between 5 days, that would be 12 hours a day. We work 40 hours a week, so 8 hours a day, usually, most people. So, I mean, you compare it like that, it's a lot of work. This is like very close to, this is getting into the territory of slavery more than anything, because they're forced to work, and if they don't work, then they're deemed as like a traitor, and the dogs will kill them. Yeah, so Napoleon passes off the idea of, oh, let's build a windmill, because he steals the idea off of Snowball. So he takes it, and he decides that we need to trade with the humans, which is, you're not supposed to do that under the 7 commandments. The first one, 2 legs enemy, okay? You're not supposed to do that, but they do it anyways. In real life, yes, this did happen. The Soviet Union could not support itself with everything, so they were kind of forced to trade with the outside world, especially if you want to be, if you want your industry to grow, you kind of have to look at other countries if you're in the Soviet Union's position, because they're so backward, technological wise, that, you have to look at other systems. So they worked really hard, and they worked really hard for this windmill. It is completed, but the windmill is destroyed, okay? And the destruction is blamed on Snowball. because there's little pig tracks that are leading from it. Now, I'm gonna put my little conspiracy theorist hat on here, but I don't think it was Snowball, because in real life he was exiled completely. And this is and Animal Farm is a direct allegory, basically, to the Russian Revolution and Soviet Union, then yeah, that wouldn't make any sense. What I think happened is that Napoleon didn't build the windmill as effectively safe as he should have, because it wasn't his idea. He doesn't know. And that he used that either A, that it got destroyed on its own and collapsed, and that he used it as a political opportunity to blame it on Snowball, or B, he kicked it out by himself because of the pig traps, and that he decided to use that against Snowball to make himself look better. And because throughout this entire thing, he's like, yeah, I told you guys that Snowball was a bad person, bad pig. Yeah, he was horrible, absolutely horrendous. All right, so that's the entirety of chapter 6. In chapter 7, he tries to find Snowball, and by find, I mean he goes through every single, I don't want to call them houses because there's only one house, the manor house, but like the barns and stuff, which is where all the animals live. And he does this so that he can have more control over people, okay? Because if he blames Snowball on everything, and if he can sniff out that Snowball's there, you create a low trust society. And low trust societies, you don't trust your fellow people, okay? Famous examples I could give is Nazi Germany, where, if you were a Jewish person, you couldn't trust anybody, because if you told somebody else you were Jewish, I mean, you're going to get sent to a concentration camp. Or, you could be just a regular person, and let's say if you weren't working on a certain day, somebody else could say, oh, he's a traitor. And so you get sentenced. And especially in countries like Nazi Germany, it's not free and fair trials at all. Another example I could give is French society after the French Revolution, but before Napoleon's ascension, where if you had any slight sympathies towards the king and the queen of France, you were going to get guillotined. Your national razor head down and, dead, essentially. Just because you're like, hey, maybe this could be better, Nah, you're dead. You say anything a little controversial, dead. Okay, you have to be with the party. That's essentially what's going on here. He wants to make sure everybody's divided. Everybody's divided, you can keep your power. All right? So he tries to find and executes some pigs and some sheep and cows. Which in the story, the sheep are meant to be the masses, okay? And they're very blindly loyal towards Stalin. Not Stalin, Napoleon. So he probably just, they probably didn't even do anything, but he just executed him to make it an example for the other animals. And he executes a lot of the pigs, because a lot of the pigs are, they're educated, and they're also like, what Napoleon is doing, and especially what he did against Snowball, is very suspicious and probably not a good idea. So they confess to treason. In real life, this did happen, where if you were even in the Soviet Union, where if you were even suspected of counter-revolutionary ideals or anything like that, you would have a choice. You would have a choice of either saying that you were a traitor and you were going to be executed for saying that, or B, if you weren't a traitor and you said you weren't a traitor, what they would do is that they would send you and your entire family to Siberia in gulags, which were work camps, and they would basically work yourself to death. All right, so it was either, so for these people, and especially for these animals, it was either you work yourself to death and your family, or you yourself just die and your family is safe. Most people went with the latter. Yeah, that's the conclusion of chapter 7, where everybody is terrified, and especially terrified of Snowball and other people around them, other animals around them. So in chapter 8, Napoleon has a bunch of lumber and he really wants to sell it. So he tries to go to Mr. Pilkington and Mr. Fredrick. He initially looks like he's going to sell it to Mr. Pilkington, which Mr. Pilkington represents the United Kingdom itself, and Mr. Fredrick represents Germany. So he's trying, so it looks like he's trying to sell it to Mr. Pilkington, but in the end, he actually sells it to Mr. Fredrick, and it's said it's an amazing deal. Okay, nothing can go wrong. It was specifically in cash with banknotes, and everything's great. He got enough money he wanted, even more money, and it got paid by cash, so no credit, and for lumber he doesn't need. Now, at the end of the chapter, they realized that, Mr. Fredrick, not such a trustworthy guy. The banknotes were actually fake. He gave him fake money, and that fake money is worthless. So this, in real life, represents the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was a temporary alliance between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, where they wanted to split Poland into two, and this was a sphere of influences. So, and the betrayal is when, in real life, in World War II, Germany attacked the Soviet Union, and millions died in the Eastern Front. So that happens, and it is announced that the revolution has been completed. All right, now they're trying to get into a more stable government, which is what most revolutions happen. The revolutionary period happens, and then you have the governmental period happens. Famous example of this is the 1848 revolutions all across Europe, but specifically in Germany, where everybody rebels, but not all of them are, most of them fail in a way, but also succeed because the people get more rights, even though the king is still in charge. So that happens, and throughout this entire thing, since Napoleon is not a great speaker, Squealer, that's his name. I was about to say Squeaker. I mean, that would be hilarious, though. I mean, George Orwell missed an opportunity there. But Squealer, whose in real life counterpart is Molotov himself. He's the one who signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Ribbentrop, obviously, being the German guy. He is an amazing speaker, and he sets out what Napoleon is going to do, which he's not really going to do that. He's not for equality and all that. He's basically Napoleon's lapdog in a way, but he says it smartly so that all the animals agree to it and don't question it. So, he says that everything's going to be fine to the masses. So in later stages of chapter 8, Mr. Fredrick decides to attack the farm, which is emblematic and an allegory to the German invasion of the Soviet Union, but specifically in this case, the Battle of Stalingrad, because they just made this windmill and they call it Napoleon's windmill, which Stalin in real life helped helped the city of Volgograd, built it up more, and replaced Volgograd with Stalingrad, with his own name. And the battle in real life costed 1.5 million deaths or casualties, which was more casualties in that one battle than in the Western Front or in the African Front combined, which is insane to think about. All right, that's one battle. There were more deaths in that one battle in the city alone than there were when Americans, Canadians, and the English stormed the beaches of Normandy, where the Americans and British invaded Italy, where the Americans invaded Northern Africa, and all the naval battles in the European theater, especially in the English Channel, were, within their deaths with submarine warfare. That is insane to think about. So the farm and the windmill it's in ruins, essentially. They have to build it back up. So they do that. But Boxer, with the battle, he's the best worker on the farm. He got shot a lot. So he's not doing well. Boxer realizes a little bit what's going on, and he starts to question it more. Not in like an accusatory tone of, we know what's up with you, why are you doing this type of thing. He's more trying to understand. He gets shot, and it looks like he's not going to make it even with the medicine he's given. So what the Page do is that they send him to to the glue factory, where essentially he's going to die. The Page are like, he's going to die anyways, let us get material wealth for it. Which is insane, because that's the exact opposite of what this revolution was supposed to be. And yeah, workers got tossed aside instantly if they were almost about to retirement age, which Boxer was almost. He only had, I think, a year or two, no, maybe a couple months, in between, a couple months or 2 years, somewhere in there, where he was going to have only 3 years of retirement. And since he was not useful to the state anymore, they essentially sent him to his death. So at the final chapter, the pigs, they walk on their hind legs, which is not what's supposed to happen, because you're not supposed to look or do anything human. Where after the war, not after World War II, during the war, but almost at the end of it, the United Kingdom, the United States, and the USSR, or Soviet Union, they had a meeting, the big three, and they decided to, talk about what Europe was going to look like, what Europe and Asia was going to look like after the war, and that's basically what happens when the pigs invite the humans over to the animal manor, but then they replaced the name with the manor house, which was the original name of the house at chapter 1, which shows that even though the revolution took place, nothing really changed. They just the animals just replaced their chain. They grew out of their chains, defeating the humans, and just replaced it with other animals, putting other animals in chains. That's all that happened. And the pigs, especially Napoleon and Mr. Pilkington, they're having a good old time, having a party, and they're both playing cards, and eventually they get mad at playing cards, which embodies what the Cold War is going to be. They both get mad at each other a whole bunch, but they don't engage in direct conflict with one another. So that happens, And all the animals, they first looked at the barn, and with the book's most famous quote, all the commandments are gone, except for one which was changed. All animals are equal, except some animals are more equal than others. That's essentially what happened. Okay, they didn't break the chains. They just replaced it with new ones. And all the animals look into the manor house, just, sad. So that's basically in the book. I want to talk about a couple things though before I go. The animal I was talking about earlier, there was one animal who saw all this coming, and it was a donkey named Benjamin. Benjamin is a very cynical animal. He doesn't engage in the politics of it at all, because he's just like, life's gonna go on anyways. No matter if it's Mr. Jones or if it's the other animal, life's gonna go on. But he sees the writing on the wall at the very beginning, and he just does nothing about it. Which I am very conflicted on with his character. You see, his character, he's smart enough to see that not everything's gonna go well, but I don't like his attitude specifically, because I dislike when you are smart enough to change something, but you don't do it, especially for the better. Okay, I feel like he had a responsibility to help out his other animals, and because he didn't do that, his friend Boxer got killed for it, and essentially for nothing. And at chapter 10, he's very sad and even more cynical. So it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this all could have been avoided if, when all the animals were arguing, that he could have stepped up. So some other animals I didn't mention was Moses. Moses is a crow. He talks about this place called Candy Mountain, where all the animals' labors, after all their labors will help them, and that there's this magical place that will essentially save them. This is an allegory to religion, and how the communists in real life, they hated religion, because religion was used by the autocrats of Russia to say why we are in charge. We are in charge because God mandated us to be in charge, not you peasants, you poors, the poor people. Yeah, you, looking at you. But yeah, so yeah, they don't like him, but they keep him around, so they kind of understand that he is sometimes useful to a degree. Mollie represents the Kulacks. Mollie was this prized horse that Mr. Jones really liked. So Mollie is this horse that gets ribbons because she's so much better and is very self-centered. And eventually leaves the farm to go to Mr. Pilkington's farm. And this represents the Kulaks. The Kulaks were rich Ukrainian farmers. The reason why the farmers were rich in Ukraine is because Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. If you're going to farm anywhere in Europe, it's going to be Ukraine, and you're going to have a lot of food to sell. So they did that. In real life, what happened to the Kulaks is that the Holodomor happened, where the Russian government basically committed a genocide against the Ukrainian people there, which, if you're looking, you can see the parallels to today, where they took all their food, and only the government could keep that food, and that ended up starving the populace of Ukraine. Um, I give this book a 7 out of 10. It's, in my opinion, it's not as good as The Great Gatsby. I'm very biased, okay? Especially with Trotsky or Snowball. You see, he's represented as this good figure in the community. He gives out good ideas, and he in the book he's never really in the wrong. I don't know why Orwell did this, because Orwell in real life did not like Trotsky, and I feel like it's untrue to say that Trotsky was like one of the good ones. He wasn't. If he defeated Stalin in the power struggle, he would not have been that much better. He would have done probably the same things. He probably would have given more to the military. I mean, maybe the Soviet Union would have been slightly better, but no, so it's not going to be any rights. Still not going to have a whole lot of rights. I mean, maybe less famines, but I mean, that doesn't make you a good leader. That just makes just Stalin a very horrible, bad leader. And I don't know how to feel about a book that is a fable, that's meant to be an allegory to a political event. Especially when this is meant to be, this is taught to kids as young as 5th grade, which I don't know about that. I mean, I read this by myself. This book is a critique of Stalinism at the very least, which is the communist way of how Stalin did his policies. I don't know if they should have done that. I'm very conflicted with the book. For The Great Gatsby, nobody's reading The Great Gatsby at 5th grade. It's not simplified. I mean, it's easy to read, but it's not simplified. This is very much, the Animal Farm is very much simplified. And I don't know how to feel about it. Honestly, I would like you guys in the comments to let me know how you guys feel about it. Because, I mean, honestly, I don't know how to really think about it. But it's still an amazing book. I still recommend it. I don't know if I ever will bring a book up here that I wouldn't recommend. The only way I do that is if I read the entire thing. And then I just felt like, my suffering should be on you guys. Yeah, that's it for my book review. 7 out of 10. Pretty good book. Very short as well. You can read it. You can literally read it in a day or two. The only reason it took me so long is because I wanted to write stuff down. But yeah, you guys have a good one. Thank you for watching. Even subscribe. Give me a like. My next book will probably be on 1984, so stick around for that. All right, peace.